The Biden campaign deployed several top officials to the debate tonight, including California Governor Gavin Newsom. Here to discuss more of the Biden administration's response to tonight's presidential primary debate is White House correspondent for The Hill, Alex Gangitano. Alex, thanks so much for joining us. What I wanted to ask you first is, how was the Biden campaign responding to tonight's debate? I saw some tweets coming from the president's Twitter account or X account. Tell us what the campaign was deploying tonight.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Michael. So there was a lot of tweets and statements coming out of the Biden campaign pushing back on just generally what Republicans were saying and defending their own record. So first off, they were definitely very quick to push back on remarks about the economy and Republicans, saying that the economy didn't improve under President Biden. He's actually hurting Americans. And the Biden campaign did that by using this term Maganomics, which we saw them roll out as kind of a way to compare to Bidenomics, which is the president's economic agenda, and basically saying that under Maganomics, the working class families, middle class families are left behind, and there's tax cuts for the super rich and corporations, et cetera. We also saw a lot of them pushing back on immigration conversations during the debate, basically saying that Republican policies are cruel and inhumane. And crime, we saw them hit Biden on that. Meanwhile, the Biden campaign came back and said Republicans really have no plan on crime. This is all just lip service. An interesting one was on abortion, when Ron DeSantis came out and said this wasn't a losing issue for Republicans in 2022 in states like Florida. The Biden campaign came out and said, you know what, it was a losing issue for Republicans in 2024, and it's going to be one again in 2022, and it's going to be one again in 2024. So they were quick to the punch with a lot of these hot topics and just defending a lot of the president's record.
So a strong rapid response is interesting, but sometimes it all comes down to the numbers. And we want to go over some recent poll numbers. An NBC News survey released this week ahead of the debate found that President Biden's disapproval reached a new high. 56% say they are unhappy with the job he's doing. Only 41% approve. So how do you think that the Biden campaign plans to course correct on this? I know that his poll numbers have been pretty low the past year and that the administration and the campaign has been brushing it off. But I mean, we're getting closer to those first caucuses when voters are going to be weighing in. How do they go about this?
Yeah, their strategy has pretty much been consistent throughout these really poor polling numbers that the president has had, which is he's always made a comeback. Just watch him defy the odds once again. They revert back to in 2020 when nobody thought he would win the Democratic nomination, and here he is as president. That, of course, though, is kind of a stale argument when again and again he's seeing these poor polling numbers. Another argument that you hear from outside of the campaign, just talking to surrogates and allies on the ground, is that the American voters aren't understanding yet the real impacts of Biden policies, and that once those are pushed out, once people are seeing funding for bridges in their towns from the infrastructure law or lower healthcare prices from the Inflation Reduction Act, then people will really understand. Well, that's up to the campaign to try to make that very clear to people, what Biden policies have been able to do for individuals. And so they really have an uphill battle on trying to figure that out. And then a huge issue for the president in terms of his polling issue is, of course, his age. People see the fact that he's 80 years old, he'd be 86 at the end of a second term, as a problem. And we've seen polling show that people think that the president's age versus former President Trump, who is only a few years younger than him, is a bigger issue. So that's a battle that he's going to have to keep fighting and try to prove to people that he's up for the job regardless of his age.
There was one more stat in that NBC poll I wanted to talk to you about. Really fascinating. This has been President Biden in a direct matchup with former President Trump. They're tied at 46. President Biden would have a 1 percentage point edge over Florida Governor Ron DeSantis. But this poll actually has Biden losing by 5 percentage points to Nikki Haley. Is the Biden campaign aware of, in these sort of polls, who could be his most formidable opponent and who poses the largest risk to him? Despite right now the GOP primary polls being so lopsided for former President Trump, it seems like the actual threat to the campaign is Nikki Haley.
That's right. That's a really good question, Michael, because so much of what the Biden campaign appears to be focused on is fighting back against former President Trump. If you read these statements and looked at, the way that they were both in Michigan fighting for support from the auto workers during the strike, it looks like a rematch of 2020. But somebody like Nikki Haley, who knows her stuff on foreign policy, she does well on the debate stage. She's had experiences in multiple different fields in government. And that's what people liked about President Biden when he was running, that experience and the fact that he, had this new vision versus former President Trump about foreign policy and about issues on how to deal with domestic policy too. And people, I think, can see them as these candidates who can go up against each other if you take, Trump and DeSantis out of the picture. But it's definitely interesting when I've talked to people about if Haley is considered as much of a threat as Trump is, just based on the fact that they really just talk about Trump. And it seems like the Biden campaign is not seeing her as that kind of threat. And they're just looking at, like you mentioned, the Republican candidates' polling numbers among themselves and not the way that they poll against Biden. An interesting one is DeSantis, because the White House has pushed back on, policies in Florida that, of course, Ron DeSantis has spearheaded or signed a lot on these education standards in Florida. Not so much as pushing back on him as a candidate, because it's coming out of the White House, but pushing back on him as a governor. And we've seen a lot of that come directly from Vice President Harris going down to Florida and saying these education standards are wrong about how you teach slavery in the state and issues like that. So they have a bit of a focus on DeSantis, but I think Haley is the one that's been interesting to watch. A little lack of a focus on her, and if we'll see that creep up, especially after this last debate.
It's really fascinating because, like you said, it seems like the Biden campaign feels like it's already in a 1v1 matchup against former President Trump. Democrats have made Ron DeSantis their boogeyman when you talk about those Florida policies. But it seems like Nikki Haley is the one that poses the largest threat right there. There's one more stat I wanted to mention, just mentioning the 41 approval again and the 56 disapproval. Really quickly, I want to just look ahead to tomorrow, something that could chip away at that approval rating potentially. Tomorrow up on Capitol Hill, we're going to see the first hearing in the impeachment inquiry into President Biden. I know this is something that you and I have both been covering for The Hill very closely. Again, really quickly, we're running out of time here. How does the Biden campaign and the White House at large plan on responding to tomorrow's hearing and just in terms of the general impeachment response overall?
Yeah, so since impeachment has been floated back, over the summer, the White House has been really defensive, coming out with memos and statements for the media. Actually, they called the media out, saying that you need to do more on pushing back on lies out of what they said were lies out of what Republicans are saying. So they've been really bullish on this. And I think we're going to see that even stepped up as these hearings go on, that they're going to come out and say these are baseless attacks. Here's what actually happened. Here's why these are false lies that Republicans are peddling. And a big thing that they keep saying is that there's no evidence here to go towards the Republican claims, and they're moving forward without evidence. So it's been definitely a lot of influx towards reporters on what the White House thinks about this, and I think we expect a lot more out of them.
All right, Alex Gangitano, White House correspondent for The Hill. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Michael.